Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IntraCultural podcast. I'm Lucy.
And I'm Missy.
And we're three anthropologists, but here only today, I guess there's two of us, that lead willing observers, a firm of anthropologists fostering inclusion, equity, and change. The IntraCultural podcast covers a range of topics and answers common questions that can be better understood through using the concept of culture. And usually Alex joins us, but we're trying a thing where you will only get two hosts at a time. That way we get a break and we can give you more regular scheduling. So now a word from our sponsors. We do a certificate and a certification. So if you're interested in learning more and become more proficient in DEIB, whether that's to help you in your career development or in your current profession, it's a really updated course where we're talking about and applying all the changes of DEI landscape into the program. And essentially, the goal is that by the end, you'll get a certificate or a certification so you can learn how to create more inclusive cultures in your department, organization, university, you name it. And the main difference between the two programs is that one of them is gives you the foundations and the concepts, and the other one we help you develop your own strategic plan. And there's additional more resources in a toolkit that comes with that. And what else? Let's say anything else I forgot about the programs, Missy?
No, you did a great commercial interlude though. So we don't need it's like we should have introduced it like the Intercultural Podcast, sponsored by ICS. I like it.
And I did not script that. That just came out of my head like that. So maybe I should go into marketing and
There you go.
well, let's see. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a 50% discount, a permanent discount for anyone that's been unemployed because of the Trump budget cuts. No, because of Trump's anti-DEI executive orders. So
Because of Trump's existence. If you are unemployed because of Trump's existence, although that would probably extend further now that we've had tariff week. So
that is totally fine. Come get a 50% discount. We support you no matter what discipline you're in.
our sponsors are us. Yay. Um, so someday we'll have other sponsors, but for now, we sponsor ourselves.
I love it.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't know if there's any kinds of sponsoring commitments that we have to adhere to, so we don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, we don't. Haha. Look at that. We are so free. So how are you, Lucy?
I'm doing well. I think I mentioned this a few times, but I moved all my stuff out of storage, so it's been a busy week. But finally, I am unpacked and back to normal, which is very nice. But also, I started buying regular coffee beans again to grind them, and I was so excited because I miss the taste of coffee, like nice coffee. My family drinks instant coffee because, Mexicans and Nescafe. So I went to the store and I got some beans and they were worse than Nescafe. And I'm
No.
so upset because they cost more too.
No, I thought you were gonna tell me that you started grinding your beans and you haven't slept in 3 days.
Well, that too, because I made a French press and I forgot how strong the coffee is. I was only able to drink one cup, and usually I do like two or three. So that's also now how am I going to finish this bad coffee if I can barely drink it because of the caffeine content?
Make cold brew.
Actually, that's a good idea.
It mellows it out. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to try that. And I bought it because it said women-owned business and like fair trade and all this. And I was like, why did you burn the beans?
You're giving our women-owned business a bad name. No. No, try cold brew. That's when we get a bag of coffee that is a little like not to our palate. We
Uh-huh.
just cold brew it because it mellows out all of the acidity in the coffee.
I'll do that. I will definitely do that. Well, how are you? How are things?
Busy, busy but good. I didn't have any coffee this week, but I will like I don't always want to date the episodes, but we now start Halloween and fall preparations in August. So Um, so I'm very excited. Guess what season it is? Mm,
Pumpkin spice latte season.
it is.
Sorry, listener. As long as I've known Missy, she has been the queen of the pumpkin spice.
Absolutely. I will own that and love it. So, we currently have pumpkin butter again, and we got pumpkin spice latte. I won't say the brand because we sponsor ourselves, but um,
But if you are a pumpkin spice latte brand and want to sponsor us,
then I am your person because I would bathe in it if it were possible.
I've
Yeah.
never acquired the taste for it. I never have. But I
Yeah.
did. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I did for olives. I used to hate olives and I forced myself to eat them until I liked them. So maybe this is the way.
Yeah, just like struggle through all of it. Oh, I I like cloves. I like cloves and cinnamon, and I think that's what carries it through. Like even the one coffee shop I go to, they always have something. They have something they call oatmeal cookie. Like, and I just get it without sugar because then they put all the spices into the coffee.
I think it's the pumpkin flavor. I mean, now we're going way into the weeds with this one because I like café de olla, which same has a lot of spices, but I think it's the pumpkin flavor that in combination turns it into something else.
It does something amazing. Yes, that's what you're looking for.
All
Well,
right.
I think our differences about pumpkin and pumpkin spice are a perfect segue into our topic for today. So today we're going to focus on a question that you absolutely cannot escape from in the United States, and that's partisanship. So our question is DEI or DEIB in the United States, is it partisan? Should it be partisan?
I
And yeah, that's where we're going. We're going straight for partisanship.
I was trying to think how you're going to connect those two topics, but I think I got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I think I understand the logic here. Uh, yeah, we've touched on this topic a few times before, and mostly around our surprise that it has become so partisan because historically it wasn't. Even though, in its roots, affirmative action technically was, I would argue, has always been. Civil rights, I guess, technically was also a partisan topic. But DEIB, when it was originally conceived as if it was a baby in the 1980s, it was not intended to be partisan. In fact, it was meant to appeal to the conservative uh, white men of America. So we are definitely seeing quite a turn for DEI.
Yeah, I think historically, yeah, we could argue that civil rights itself was, but also if we go back even further, right, the original Civil Rights Act was a Republican initiative, right? And then the parties realigned. And like, you have these flip-flopping of these two different parties throughout the history of the United States, and their more and less support for civil rights and civil rights protections. But then, yeah, in the 1980s, there was so much pushback against like the initiation of and the implementation of certain kinds of civil rights, laws and policies that DEIB was conservative. And so like how did we get here, right? How did we get to within, the last 30 or 40 years, DEIB becoming now something that is very associated with like liberal and progressive folks?
Yeah. And I guess for those that haven't heard other episodes, maybe giving a little bit of background on how it wasn't originally partisan. So in the 1980s, a lot of literature on diversity management and the value of diversity management came out of the business schools. And they argued that diversity is good for business. And that is the key distinction between diversity management and affirmative action. Because whereas affirmative action a lot of the times is policies geared towards women, people of color, historically marginalized people, people that are protected categories, diversity management can be almost anyone that can be described as different. It could be neurodiversity. It could be creating policies for people based on not having weight bias. It can be based on personality, right? In addition to all the other categories. So then the argument there was that when you address differences in a meaningful way, you are doing good for your business because you're addressing your markets and you're creating more engagement, more retention. And that appealed to the people that were against affirmative action, right? Because now they're included too. Now we're saying it also benefits you and it benefits your organization and ultimately your bottom line.
Yeah, and it's very, and I think that it had that kind of like, that was the kind of push behind it was like, okay, now, right, it benefits like all sorts of difference. And it was seen as conservative, but at the same time, it also advanced LGBTQ plus movements and much faster and much further than, like, it took the law like 20 years to at least, right, to catch up with that kind of advancement. And yet it was still seen as conservative because, like, the world is diverse and you have to be able to speak across difference to have any sort of pluralistic organization or society.
Yes, and to be clear, the more progressive of social justice advocates critiqued diversity management and still continue to do by saying that it doesn't go as far and at its worst, it reproduces systemic inequities. And what that means basically is that by, some people have argued because we no longer focus on only race and gender, then we're not doing those things justice. Because we are only focusing on the business value or the bottom line, then we're not taking other strategies that don't do that as legitimate. So the progressives actually have critiqued diversity management for decades.
Hmm.
So the fact that it's being seen as a progressive liberal cutthroat agenda that's forcing ideology across the political spectrum is a really different kind of pivot that people have made. And it does make me wonder, do you not see the business value of it at all?
Yeah.
Or are you just so convinced that the market actually is one that should discriminate, right? Is it more beneficial to you to discriminate, economically beneficial or not? It raises a lot of questions for me that I don't have answers to.
Yeah. Can I just say it's kind of weird? Like, it's kind of weird because it flipped so fast, that it flipped so fast that it like started to, like, really, and I'd say legislatively anyway, and like 20, it didn't pick up until 2024 when it started to like glom on to different kinds of like partisan movements and partisan factions. And there were other critiques of like critical race theory, right, that were very popular, right, prior to 2024. But in 2024, a little bit in 2023, you started to actually see anti DEI policy move forward in a way that was extremely partisan, and that really, like, it would. I feel like it almost would have been nonsensical before because it was so well enshrined that it was simply a business management practice that made your organization better, like, up to that point.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, as you were talking, a couple of things came up for me. One of them is DEIB initiatives have benefited everyone in one way or another, right? And a really great book that I highly recommend is by Pamela Laird. And in that, she talks about the corporate ladder and how, because of the neoliberal restructuring of our society, there's been less and less opportunities for people to move up in the workplace. And so, actually, those initiatives that were called affirmative action gave us things like standardized interview questions, gave us things like now you have to have a procedure for hiring instead of just hiring your buddy who you've known for like 10, 20 years or your family members, right? It gave us more standardized, fair practices that we didn't have before affirmative action. And so that is a history that's completely been obscured, right? And made invisible. And so you have DAB practices that benefit everyone. And so I wonder if today the partisan move is to kind of say, well, those are okay. That's not DEI. What's DEI is this other thing, right? And so the redefinition of DEI to be something that's hasn't been it historically.
Yeah, I mean definitely part of the move because like, as we've covered, Trump's executive orders and like this focus is that that DEI is divisive and that it's unfair is the complete inverse of exactly what we're talking about, and that it's not merit based, right? Because everything that you're talking about is about establishing merit criteria and standardized criteria for everyone, which then benefits everyone, right? Because then the most qualified people are the people that actually get the job, not whatever is happening right now, which, like, if you get rid of DEIB, then you actually have fewer qualified candidates that are being selected based on merit. And I think that we're seeing the repercussions of that. Am I allowed to say, oh my goodness, HHS right now, right? Like our Health and Human Services and like what's happening with like vaccine mandates right now is really scary. And you have somebody heading it that has no background in like scientific inquiry. And, I know it's an appointment, but merit based something would be super useful, right? In that context. So,
There's so
like,
many departments like that now. Yeah, and oh man, when you said that, it like shocked my system, so I completely forgot what I was gonna say. And but yes, to your point, and also, I mean, just continuing the point from earlier, these are conservative arguments.
right,
We should have equal employment opportunity for everyone is a conservative argument. The more progressive argument is we should do things like, preferential treatment to level systemic discrimination issues. We should address historical things in the present, right? The we should have equal employment opportunity today is not usually taking historically as a perspective, and it's funny, the ahistoricalness is what makes it conservative in a way, when it's gross. But the other thing about it is this um attempt, or this kind of effort that's been put into place, that now we're not taking seriously things like merit, because if we were to take it seriously, we would look at how things are systemic, right?
right.
Like it's not just about you as an individual, it's about who you benefit from, what networks you're part of, what your parents did to give you a leg up. All of these things are part of the consideration. So the progressives would even argue that there is no such thing as merit, that merit is biased already. So it's really interesting. It's that the most conservative part of the argument of DEI is what's being called progressive.
Yeah, I think it mirrors too, and like we part of the reason that we like, titled this one is it partisan is that part of party realignment and increasing polarization in the United States is that like we're seeing positions that used to be right conservative in the 1980s, DEIB, right, as a business strategy, suddenly moving to being a moderate or central position and then moving to be a progressive position, which would indicate that our entire party system has moved right.
That's
Right.
what I was about to ask you. Like, what does this say about our political system generally?
Mhm. Yeah, and so like that rightward movement can tell you that if the exact same statement in 1980 was associated with not a political party, by the way, but a position, a conservative position, because we didn't have such like distinct polarization. So it would be like a conservative position in 1980 would be DEIB, right, is the way that we should address, right, inequality in the United States. And like watching that move alongside so many other things, but watching that move alongside so many other things is absolutely indicative of the fact that like a 2025 Democrat might be a 1980s Republican, right? In terms of platform. Right,
Yeah.
and platforming on a lot of it, and because of so many of the positions that were held by, right, people that identified as Republican in that era are now part of like a Democratic Party platform and are seen as like not just part of the platform, but like progressive in a way that didn't exist before. And that's very much a march of the entire system to the right, which is notable.
Well, here's the question I have. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it is, the diversity management operates a lot on affirmative action categories and on data that the government requires organizations to collect. So, in addition to race and gender disability, veteran status is another one.
Mhm.
Veteran status and affiliation is typically considered a lot more conservative as a segment than other groups. It's like some veteran groups don't consider themselves part of DEI, some do. I know that when we do DEIB benchmarking, Military Times for Vets has their own benchmarking for veterans. And that's part of the bigger DEI initiatives is to offer initiatives for vets to support not just vets themselves, but their spouses, their
Mhm.
families, to provide benefits, to provide more inclusion practices, to provide mentorship, to provide a lot of different things that people can do with that segment. And that segment is historically seen as the conservative segment of DEI.
Yeah.
So, how do you like, what are your thoughts about their role or how they've kind of been sliced and diced by being pushed to the left, even if they themselves might not identify as left?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and I think that that's also where, like, you know, I think that the public understanding of DEI has also moved alongside this movement of that realignment. So understanding DEI as something that is super lefty progressive has also put those folks in a very interesting position, both to help advance some of the important aspects of DEIB practice for themselves, for their communities, and for everyone. It's put them in a position to both lose coverage potentially, but also to be potential advocates for moving or changing the way that we're talking about DEIB. But to date, a lot of people in that sector in particular who have tried, um, because they fall under such direct purview of the executive branch, have been silenced or fired, right? So I think that you do see veterans groups actually getting into the fray on some of this in a way that they probably wouldn't have been before. And this isn't there's another category of people that I'm thinking of that have been increasingly included in DEIB, and that is um, rural people, right?
Mhm.
People from the rural United States. And I'm not sure like how that's going to play out, but you saw the defunding of rural hospitals in the current budget cycle. You see a lot of rural farmers in all sorts of states struggling in part because of what's happening with immigration, right? And because of the cutting of all sorts of what were in essence DEI initiatives that targeted them and their well-being. I always say cancer research trials, right, for sure, because like that's, historically, right, folks in rural areas didn't get the same level of medical care and we're cutting those hospitals in addition to cutting their access to cancer trials. So all of that to say, like, I think putting folks in the position of like needing to defend DEI is an interesting place for them to be, and it's an opportunity, but I think that we all have a lot more work to do to explain to people that they are and were benefiting from these initiatives in ways that they themselves may not have really understood.
Oh, yeah. And I'm thinking here, back when the NIH was a scientifically legitimate institution, they had as a
Wait,
diversity
was that like a couple months ago? Way back in the way back.
back in the before times
It's
when
like
they were actually more reputable and
like
you
6 months or 5 years, whatever that's been. I'm not sure.
know,
Sorry.
right. I like how that just rolled off my tongue so easily. Uh, but they had under their diversity categories, there were designations for who counted as a part of the diversity category. And a big one was socioeconomically disenfranchised individuals to
Right.
rural people in rural neighborhoods. And yes, because cancer rates are higher, because they're exposed to more environmental pollution, because of a whole number of reasons. And in addition to cancer research, diabetes research
Yeah.
on health, any kinds of health inequities really affected white working class individuals and working class people in general, and lower income than that, even, and like something like the opioid crisis, for freaking sake, that is a DEI health issue.
Right.
So
Well, I think we're boiling down to like part of the problem is that like one that it's getting reframed as this like very partisan thing, right? When it is not and hasn't been. And if we had to put it into a slice, it would have been a more conservative position, like starting in the 80s. But the fact that lots of people weren't aware that they are quote DEI, right? That they are and were and have been already benefiting from those kinds of initiatives is part of the misunderstanding of what's happening right now, especially with the Trump administration trying to say that they're getting rid of it because they want to help white folks. And I'm like, but which white folks? Because it doesn't really seem like all the kind of, um, you know, rural white Americans who don't have a lot of money are benefiting from anything that's happening right now.
or that they even know exactly what DEI is. And that's why I wonder, it's like there's part definitely of lack of information and lack of, those kinds of ways that those systemic issues play out. Because if I'm just an average person living somewhere randomly, I'm not aware of what people doing in the hospital nearby are doing, right? Like what kinds of policies they're engaging with or what kinds of initiatives they have. Like I'm just out there living my life. But I do think politically, the strategy has been to slice and dice DEI to pick the worst representations of it and call them divisive, and then use that as an umbrella term to just gut everything related to DEI, and to then add more things to that pocket that used to not be called DEI, right? Like entire anthropology departments, because they study cultural differences, are being called DEI. So it seems like the attacks are it's like DEI is just the excuse to go after many other things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's in part to like, I guess my second big point about partisanship. Like the first is like everything has moved right and we should all be aware of that because you move too far right and you're not a democracy anymore, right? If you don't have anything that resembles, right, you know, an ability to have conversations, and if everything moves too far the right, you move yourself right on out of a place on a continuum where you can be an actual functional democracy.
Yeah.
But the other big thing is that that polarization, like political parties themselves, have changed in terms of how you belong to them. Um, and so I think you've seen slowly over time that alongside or as part of polarization is that like you have to believe or somehow hold in your heart an entire slate of things and that someone has deemed it like you have to do all of this and it all has to be in alignment for you to be in party A or else you're in party B. Right? And I think that's part of like, we've talked about binaries in the past, right? Binary oppositions. So you have to like somehow believe from A to Z to be a member of this party. and that party is part of who you are in terms of your identity. Okay. You can't just hold a position and still say, "Oh, I'm a conservative, but I am a, uh, a pro-abortion conservative anymore." Like, you're out.
So are you saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you saying that because we are in this moment where your political party is so part of your identity, that there isn't room for diversity of thinking in those parties?
I am saying that that's exactly what is happening, right?
And that as a result, the if you're a Democrat, you have to be advocating for DEI, and if you're a Republican, you have to hate DEI.
Correct.
Mm.
And if you're not, then you are not displaying your party, right? Like badges properly. And that's part of what has happened to parties because you could have, right, liberal kinds of parties that where people held different kinds of positions on issues. And increasingly, that has become narrower and narrower. And instead, you have to agree with all these issues and oppose all these ones, or else you're out, right? Or you're not really part of this group, which is not really a good strategy for belonging. I'm just saying.
And I mean, I see that so much, especially with Trump's, how far he's gotten with this whole you have to be loyal to me or else you're fired approach, which is, when he started doing that, everyone was shocked because then he just had yes men and yes women all around him all the time, or else they would suffer his wrath. But I
Mhm.
also saw it on the Democrat side
Oh,
when people could not critique Kamala Harris, when people could not put in Bernie Sanders as a legitimate counter to Hillary. Like if you were pro Hillary, pro Bernie, then you were anti Democrat.
right.
People
It
still
it
hold this position. So, full disclosure, I voted for Bernie. People still hold this position where they're so pro Hillary that they said that, that's why she lost.
Yeah, that's no, that's a whole nother episode. Um, but yeah, that's exactly it. That like part of what's happening with like making DEIB into a partisan issue is exactly that what is already an erosion of democratic practice, where if it's really pluralistic, then you should be able to invite diversity of thought, all those ideas into a tent of a party so that you can actually grapple with them. Critique is highly democratic, right? And it's something that is really important, but once you shut down critique, which I'm sorry, but like the Democrats have done it in their own way, right? And like we're seeing the results of it with the Republicans, but I'm sure that we've all had some type of tiff with someone over like, critiquing Joe Biden, right? Critiquing Harris, critiquing Obama. Oof, right? You could not, right, critique Obama for the policy positions that he held that have contributed to what we see today with immigration and the redefinition of terrorism and all sorts of things, right? So that's a huge issue and tells you how political polarization and this kind of like party restructuring has totally impacted so many things, including making DEIB partisan.
And one of the questions I mean, originally when we started this episode, I was going to ask you, Missy, on behalf of the white people, what's wrong with the white people? But now I'm wondering what's wrong with all of us. And the reason I was going to ask you that question is because before the business case was used to appeal to the white men who were seen to hate affirmative action by love money, right? So if I could make the argument that it's going to bring you more money, then why wouldn't you do it? And that has been, I've written about this and so has so many other people, but that has been seen as a way to appeal to white men is through their economic interest. But I wonder to what extent that's playing a role, like how the business landscape has changed. Is it changing? Because I, in the one sense, I would like to think that we're concerned with things other than profit and money. But on the other sense, it seems like there's a redefinition of the kinds of ways that business decisions should be made.
Mhm.
And it's not just an economic incentive only, like the hyper neoliberal mindset would have us think, but people, large corporations are doing all kinds of things, including they're afraid to make business decisions because they are just in fear of what the administration might do to them. That's another kind of incentive. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, I have many. Um, I think my so the way that I've been like kind of following this and thinking about this is, that a lot of smart people are basically identifying what's happening right now with like DEIB just like dropping off the radar in the public sphere in many ways, as like people trying to like weather the moment. So they're going to kind of go into hiding and they'll rebrand their DEIB and they'll do it really quietly and not make too many waves. But the problem, I think that's what's happening because we know that it is good for the bottom line, and so we know that a lot of organizations are just going underground with it, like, if they can. Educational sectors are a different animal, but I think that like the bigger problem there is that there's no more public discourse about it except what's coming out of the Trump administration. And so it's leading to more misunderstanding and more partisanship. And what the folks that have gone completely underground don't quite realize is that if they want to keep doing that thing, right, that it's going to be really hard to bring it back if the only public discourse about it is that it's actually discriminatory and it's bad for you. And I think that's part of the problem. But the decisions out of fear, I think they're so short-sighted because if every corporation, like, since they're people, right, under our law, if they all just stood up and said, "No, we're gonna keep doing this," like, then they wouldn't all be attacked at the same time. But because they're just going internal and trying to save their own skin or, like, wait it out, I think that that's part of, like, it might be an internal strategy, but if they could think of themselves more systemically, they could actually save their own bottom line, which, like, it I that's my take.
Yeah, and I wonder too if they're just not saying that they're doing it, but they're still doing it, right? Because so many of those initiatives are not evidently DEI.
Yeah.
Like if you're creating a promotion process that addresses people's concerns with favoritism at work, which happens all the time, then
Mhm.
technically you're doing a DEI thing, but you just don't have to tell people that's a DEI thing. So yeah, but to your point, when organizations rebrand to doing community engagement or something else, this has been something that's come up a lot of times with us is how do we get back from there? If everyone is doing something similar but calling it different things, how would we know that we're doing the same thing?
Yeah. And I think that's part of what's happening right now. It's like, we know that some people have to go underground to continue to do the work so that they don't get completely defunded. But there are a lot of players in the system right now that do have the power and the cover that they don't necessarily need to go underground right now to continue doing the work. And I think that it should be those that have more power that should be leading the charge publicly to say, no, like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is actually a good thing in a completely nonpartisan neutral way. It is good for business. It is good for like pluralistic democracy. It is good for all of these things. And I'm just, Lucy's heard me talk about this too much, but I'm really worried about the absence of an actual voice talking about what it is and what it's good for and how it's not partisan in the public sphere in a way that has an impact. And that concerns me because it's necessary, both for businesses to function and for organizations to be able to move forward in any way in the society we live in.
Yeah. And I guess I'll give a quick example of how it's not partisan and benefits everyone. I know the conservative narrative is to call it preferential treatment, which it is not. DEIB is against preferential treatment, first of all. But let's say a manager was hiring someone. If they're doing DEIB wrong, they're saying, I need to hire a person of color, so I can't give this job to anyone that's not a person of color. People say that, and that is wrong. Please stop saying that. You're making it worse for everyone. One,
Yes.
it is illegal. And two, this is the reason why we are in this situation. One reason, not the only reason. But the way that you would do that, if you were, we would do that if as DEI experts, is you're trying to increase your diversity in your organization. It's not to say I'm now going to hire a person of color to fill in that role because we need more of blank leaders in these roles, but it's to actually address what are the issues that is causing these kinds of biases and discriminations to happen at an operational level, right? So where are you promoting this job description in the job ad? Who is your audience that's applying? Where can you expand your network so you get more applicants? How can you standardize the process so that everyone thinks that it is a fair process? And how can you change your culture so that people can see that you care about them, so marginalized people would feel comfortable taking a job at your organization, right? All of those questions are really hard to answer. And that is why there are DEIB professionals who get trained in how to do those things. It is not just, I'm going to hire this blank person because I'm going to fix this problem by doing this. It's a systemic problem and you need to address it systemically.
Right.
So that as an example of how it's completely different, right? Like how the narrative on DEIB from politically is very different than the actual reality on DEIB practice it plays out. I think, and we talked about this a lot before, like we do have a competency issue. Like
Yeah.
part of the big problem of DEI is that we have a lot of people who are doing these jobs that don't know how to do their jobs. I'm sorry to say, don't hurt me. Don't say mean things about me, but but it's true, right? And I think that if we're going to create a DEIB again that's nonpartisan, we need to be really upfront about our weaknesses in the discipline and how we can truly actually make it work for everyone, for all these people. And to your point, have messaging to that effect to
Right.
counter the current narrative.
Yeah, I think that that is absolutely spot on, and I think that that is necessary and completely absent, and it's why we're suddenly seeing all this, like, I the Department of Ed stuff about what discrimination is and isn't itself is very problematic. So while we're doing that, can we also educate our current officials on exactly what discrimination, terrorism, and human trafficking are too, because they're having a lot of trouble. Oh yeah, and free speech. We're having a lot of trouble trying to figure out what that is. But I think part of that is not just creating that kind of both messaging and standards for doing really good nonpartisan DEIB work that benefits like everyone and still addresses historical marginalization, right? Um, is part of that is PR and messaging. Part of that is making sure that we're also helping people understand legally, right? And socially what those terms actually mean, not just diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but also like discrimination, right? And what do we mean when we say, right, marginalized, right, groups, and who is like, being helped, directly when all of us are directly or indirectly benefiting from every initiative. But I'm sorry, but if rural folks have been absent from cancer trials, then that means everybody's like understanding of how cancer drugs work is worse, right? Like that is a very clear way that when we leave people out of these kinds of things, our science is worse. And like we could very clearly say that that is nonpartisan, right?
Yeah. Completely agree. I wish we could talk about this forever. But one more thing I wanted to bring up before we start wrapping up is this issue that we are politically divided
Mhm.
and the parties are redefining themselves in a lot of ways, right? Like now the Republican Party, if it wasn't before, it has for sure been redefined through a Christian value ideology
Mhm.
and connecting politics, the state, and religion in ways that arguably have been I think antithetical to the reason we have the United States.
Yep.
And I wonder, while we speak optimistically about DEIB is and should be nonpartisan because there's so many ways it can help society generally, the idea of helping society generally has always been a progressive one.
But I
I'm
have
sorry. I'm sorry. I know that was really that was really
no,
facetious.
no, but I would argue that that if we think about pluralism as part of both, it overlaps with what DEIB is. It overlaps with what actually functional democracy is. And I think that, we have seen more and less conservative justices, more and less conservative people since the inception of the country, like, you know, really engage with the idea that a pluralistic democracy that has expanded representation and debate, that I feel like there have been times where that's extremely partisan and times where it's extremely not. But again, there have been thinkers on, every side of the aisle that have argued for pluralism.
That's fair. I guess what I'm thinking is, when we were in high school, or in my high school, my political science teachers were horrible. I will not name them, but we had some pretty bad history teachers and political science teachers. But anyway, there was one, I forget which one it was, but we had a class where we had to do a survey. It was like a quick questions, like 10 questions. We didn't know what it was. The teacher gave out this, it's funny because I don't know if you remember when printing was in blue ink.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's printed in blue ink. I don't know if anyone, you will name an age yourself by remembering that part. But and it was that kind of like transparency ink, like when you write the copy of a check, if people do that anymore.
Oh my God. You're just like, give me one more that ages you. Give me one more. Come
No,
on.
no, no, that's all you're getting. Okay, so I just have this vivid memory of walking into class and there being a piece of paper and that kind of blue ink. And we were asked to fill it out, and we did, no right or wrong answers. And at the end, it told you if you were a Republican or a Democrat. And the way that the questions, and even I remember this in my very young mindset, but the way that and it told me I was a Republican, by the way, super interesting. But the way that it grouped them and grouped the answers was that if you leaned heavily self-interest, you were a Republican. And if you leaned collective interest, if you care about other people too, you were a Democrat. I know, isn't that strange?
Yeah, it is, because I think that that is a complete misrepresentation of how even contemporary Republican groups think about themselves and their relationship to community.
Well,
I
yes. And I think that's part of a shift where you see family values with the religion part, whereas the way that they were conceptualizing the Republican aspect was like a Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan like
right,
thing,
right. Right.
So it's so one, yes, you're totally right. Like it's completely not current or representative. And arguably, like, even if you're self interested economically, you also care about other things, but that is the dominant narrative about what you're supposed to be like.
Right.
And I remember at the time, I grew up very poor, very marginalized. And I wanted to get rich. I was like, I'm going to make money because I'm going to take my family out of poverty and I'm going to do all these things. And just that mindset put me in the Republican bracket. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense either.
No.
But the reason why the reason why I bring up that story is because, again, going back to the DEIB, if it's supposed to be about the bottom line and your interest, we're saying you benefit from this too. We're producing that narrative, right? That it is good for everyone and it is good for your self-interest and my self-interest. And is it time, like there's been tons of writing on this, to make it be about something else
Yeah.
that people care about across
Yeah.
party lines? I don't know what that is, but it does bring me to that question.
Yeah. And you know, I think that there are a lot of things that people do care about across party lines. And I think that the messaging around it, if it's going to like kind of rise from this like hidden like thing or the ashes or whatever is happening right now. But I think that one thing that I find, at least in the communities that I study, is that like a lot of people are really invested in like helping other people
Mm.
and like they are, right? And that I think that there is, of course, investment. But like Lucy, even like your survey, it's like, yeah, I want to become rich so I can help all these people, right? You weren't like, I want to become rich so I can have like a mega yacht and then I can like spit on all of my friends, right? Like, and I'm sure that there are some people that are socialized into that too.
That was not
But
an option
like
in the third.
right. But I think that like the thing that I've seen with at least all the communities I've worked with, no matter where they sit on the political spectrum, and especially if they come from like a working class and like, you know, an orientation that they just like don't have a lot of money, there's so much of an impetus to help other people and to like keep them like happy and to like make sure that they thrive. And I think that that's something that like a lot of people have in common. And it's sad to see us all being divided on all of these other things. That's also something that overlaps with DEIB. And I think that if, you know, that's part of how we think about it or could message it going forward, is that like it's something that is common to people that like just I don't think has been part of that narrative, you know?
But I think, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I really will also see that, especially in working class communities and poor communities, is you survive through community, right? And we
Yeah.
talked about this before in resiliency
Mhm.
episode. But the big difference is who counts as people.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's where we've been in really dangerous territory, right?
Right.
Is that immigrants don't count as people currently, like transgender people don't count as people. And so when we dehumanize those groups, then we can say we're helping people because we don't count those specific groups as people. Right. And I think, yeah, I think that's where the DEIB comes in, is the humanization of everyone and everyone being worthy and valuable, and of having equal access to the opportunities we're supposed to have access to.
Right. And that, like, you know, when you're thinking about the boundaries of community, like, I think part of the really nefarious thing that happens a lot, right? That, you know, I don't know, Marx would tell us if I can say that word. And like, I mean, I'm sure on some scale we're probably already called communists because Joe Biden was a communist, haha. But like, is that like, you know, you're somehow seeing that like not only are we dehumanizing people, but those people will hurt you, right? That they're going to hurt your community. They're going to hurt like something about you, whether it's actual physical violence or economic, you know, destabilization. And that, you know, that's part of the strategy to get you to kind of look at your neighbor and be like, this is the problem, rather than the, you know, actually acknowledging the larger problem, which is like, you know, especially socioeconomically, that they're like, there's somebody that is going to be a trillionaire. Like, I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. But dehumanizing that person over there and saying that they're going to hurt you is part of the larger issue here that DEIB does help address. And if we could just centralize, like, how that helps us to better help each other, that would be a useful tool.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it feels like history is repeating itself, even though we should know better. We should know better. And we're running up on time. But one of the things that this makes me just feel so much more convinced about is that we can't stay silent. Like, we have to challenge these narratives wherever they are happening, using the privileges that we have and the roles that we have to challenge the narratives, because narratives are really powerful and those stories are really powerful. And if we see people being dehumanized, to step in and say something about it, to do something about it. Missy and I, we still haven't done an episode on our trips that we took, but we went to Denmark. And one of the things that I love to do, no matter where I go, is I like to go to museums because I'm a nerd. So Missy wanted to do all these things. And I was like, I just request one museum. And then you told me about the Holocaust Museum there. And I didn't know this history, but do you want to share this history? Because I don't think most of our listeners probably would.
The resistance. So the Denmark, this was a this is a beautiful piece of the history of Denmark. Is like, so folks from Denmark are super white and super blonde and super blue-eyed, right? They are, during World War II, they were part of how Hitler basically imagined like the ideal race. And so that allowed certain people within Denmark to actually leverage the fact that they were seen as being part of that class of people to resist, and which complicated things for Hitler and that like regime, because it would look really bad if they were taking out the blonde-haired, blue-eyed white people. But they used that to sneak a whole bunch of Jewish folks like across into Sweden, and to actively resist for much longer than some of the other countries that were surrounding Germany, because Denmark is right up against Germany. But it was a that museum was rough, right? But it was part of thinking about how like that kind of privileged identity can be used to actually speak truth to power and push back. So we invite you, if you are Denmark, to push back against that kind of dehumanization, whether it's through the lens of explaining what DEIB really is, talking about discrimination, humanizing people who are currently being dehumanized. But if we say nothing, if we do nothing, then that just leaves a whole bunch of blank space to be filled up with misinformation and nefarious actors and nefarious actions.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to that not everything has to be about self-interest, right? Like Denmark's arguably their self-interest would have been to just give in and enjoy a nice cozy life with the Nazi regime. But they're like, no, this goes against our values and our people. And we're not going to make Jews wear the Star of David because no, they're all so Danish people. And we're not going to separate ourselves by that. And they resisted things like that. And then they pretended to play nice with Hitler while feeding intelligence to the British. And it's nice to see all of that history. But again, very rough and scary. But I think when we really commit to helping others in wide as terms of possible, that's really when we see like our humanity come alive, right? And that's part of what it means to be nonpartisan. It's part of counting all of us into the group of the people that we care about.
That was a very Margaret Mead statement. And if you don't know who Margaret Mead is, we'll link one of her famous statements about like the history of civilization into our notes, which, is based on this idea that like you really see humanity like becoming humanity at the very moment where you see humans helping other humans, even especially when they're in distress.
I did not know that quote, but I feel so incredibly honored that you said that. So now I have to look it up.
Yeah, that's Margaret Mead had like wonderful, but like that's what we share as humans and as a wider group of humans. And I know that it's in the ethos of the communities of Trump supporters that I work with just as much as it's the community of right left-leaning right folks that I work with. If that horizon can expand a little more and we just stop thinking about it as partisan identity, I think it will be good for many things, including, right, economics, right?
Yeah, I believe it. And imagining what other kinds of economics we could have.
That's right.
Part of that.
That benefit all of us.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Let's end there. I think let's end on a hopeful note. Hey, utopia.
We did it.
Right.
Oh, no. We did part 0.001. We'll do
We
part
fixed it.
0.02 next time.
Hey, thanks everyone. We'll talk to you next time.
See you next time.